Alright, so I'm Hersh, one of the founders of Opacity. The main thing that we do is we build infrastructure and dev tooling around zk-TLS. High level idea, but I'll go into a bit more detail later on. Just doing a ZKP over some HTTPS requests. Like, simple example, like you can do a range proof of your bank balance and that the data came from like API.json, something along those lines. And what I think is unique about us in the ZK space is that we really take a product-focused approach to what we think is an opportunity to fix the internet. Where I think ZK, we're kind of like our minds are attached to building infrastructure. Like there's a lot of money being flown into building infrastructure around ZK, but what we really care about is like solving people's problems and building new products. So some background on me. I first bought Bitcoin when I was like 16 years old back in 2013, so like been a diehard of this space all my formative years. And the way I got into zk-TLS is I was a founding engineer of this startup called Demo. I don't know if you guys are familiar. Decentralized infrastructure for moving objects is like a helium, but for cars essentially. So we had a token. We'd incentivize users with a token to connect their cars to a decentralized network. And I got to work on this hardware device that we sold to users. They could plug it into the diagnostics port for their car, and we would that's how we would collect vehicle data. And like the main thing that we're trying to address with the main thing that we're trying to address with zk-TLS is this poverty of verifiability that exists in the world. And I stumbled into this during my time at Demo, but I didn't really understand that was the problem. Like the hardest thing to see in life is the thing that isn't there, but if it was there, it'd make your life easier. That was like this property of verifiability for me at my time at Demo. And then when I left Demo, because I realized what we need in the world is verifiable data, I spent some time in the self-sovereign identity industry, the world of verifiable credentials. Like I worked at a competitor for Spruce, but ultimately, I realized that model I didn't think was bound for success. I'll get to the details why. But through all these experiences, I just got more and more obsessed with this idea of zk-TLS. Because I think it's a route to basically fire hose verifiable data into the world at scale without any of the bottlenecks we've seen in the other approaches. But before I get into it, I wanted to take a moment to reflect on the state of ZK today. Just to ask you guys a question, what products are there that you can use that are using ZK to solve people's problems today? Right? And there's going to be a really short list. There's really not that many of them. And if you say something like ZK P2P, which I'm a fan of, you're actually really making my point because that's a product that relies on verifiable data. Right? I always like, it's an annoying question I like to ask a lot of ZK people. It's like, why don't we see more products in the world using ZK and solving people's problems? And the answer I usually get is that the dev tooling isn't ready. And I don't buy this argument because this assumes a bigotry of low expectations against like the tyranny of will of humanity to actually build something useful. Just an example, the Super Nintendo was built on a 3 megahertz processor, pretty high fidelity game, and an absolute feat of engineering, right? It was like the way they had to program this thing was not easy, but because they wanted to build something useful, they went through the gauntlet of this stuff. So the thesis of our company is that the reason we don't see more useful ZK products is because we live in a world with the poverty of verifiability, right? Very simple things that you want to prove. Where do you work? How long have you worked there? How much money do you make? Have you made good contributions? You just can't do, especially in an adversarial, decentralized context. And I'll say it again, we live in a world with a poverty of verifiability. It's as simple as that. And this is important for ZK because ZK only works if you have verifiable data that works, right? If you don't have verifiability into your, whatever you put into your circuit, it's like garbage in, garbage out. You can't actually build like a complex system on top of it. I won't go through it here, but if you do the accounting of how much verifiable data that there is in the world, there's really not that much. Especially user-facing data, you're really limited in what you can do. And so, I mentioned I work in the self-sovereign identity industry, right? The reason, like, a lot of these companies started back in like 2018, 2017, and they basically failed in my opinion. And the reason why is because this model of getting people to sign data, like I think at the end of the talk, of the previous talk, there was a discussion about this, is requires cooperation from the people who have all the data that you want, right? And no one has been able to get enough momentum to actually convince people to start signing data. And the reason why is, well, for one, on the standards boards, it's the people who control them are like engineers from Google, Microsoft, all these big tech companies, right? And in the best case scenario, you're dealing with a company who's neutral and having like signed their API responses or just like signing verifiable credentials. But in a lot of cases, it's actually against their interest to do so, right? And even if you convince people to start signing data, like this is going to be a strange format of a talk where I'm only going to do 20 minutes, and the rest of the 20 minutes is going to be a partner that they're working with. I'll let him explain, but what he's doing is like attacking DoorDash, or actually letting like delivery drivers in restaurants really easily onboard into his system, which is competitive with DoorDash. Once they realize that, if you convince DoorDash to start signing data, they're just going to stop, right? Because they realize it's against their interest. So we can't actually assume that we have cooperation. And so the main value prop of ZK-TLS is that there's already a lot of valuable information that's exposed over HTTPS. So this is not going to be a technical talk. The details of how we achieve this, how we solve like the MVC collision problem, where you could generate a ZKP and potentially bring it on chain. There's actually another talk that I gave, but if you have any questions on that, I'm really happy to talk about it. But I actually want to stay product focused for this talk. But in terms of fixing the internet, what we do is we sacrifice cooperation from these big tech companies in exchange for cooperation from users, essentially, which is like the model for the internet that we want. It's like the main dream of crypto since its inception. And so I'm absolutely convinced ZK-TLS will unlock a Cambrian explosion in ZK. And just to list a few arguments for why, it's like, since we require cooperation from users, there's way more users in the world than there are like tech companies. And so the addressable problem space is much larger, right? There's more problems that you can address for users than you can for big tech companies. And then I'm going to go through a few use cases of like partners that we're working with where ZK-TLS actually enables new business models and strategies that just were not possible before. And so I'll come back to that at the end. So the crown jewel in our partner list is this company called Daisy, and they're actually making good money on the TikTok API, believe it or not. So what I'm about to explain is like a huge market that happens behind the scenes, and it's how like these young Gen Z influencers monetize their audience. But and it's, let's say I get a brand deal for makeup, right? I'm an influencer. These brand deals denominate the payout per 100,000 views. So there's like a strategy these influencers employ in order to increase the amount of views that you get, and so you get a bigger payout. And what they do is, I'll be in a group chat with like thousands of other influencers, and right as I post a video, I'll have coordinated with a few other influencers, and then immediately they'll go like, comment, they'll engage with it because TikTok uses the amount of engagement within the first few minutes to determine if they show it to more and more people, and then it just goes gangbusters in the algorithm. Just to give you a number, this route of advertising on TikTok has a cost per view that's 8 times lower than the official way, right? But if you go talk to these influencers who are doing it in like the group chat way, the biggest pain point they have is slow payouts, because you can't, like, TikTok does not have an open API. There's no, especially no verifiability on it, so you have to have a human review process, essentially. And so the payouts take many days, and what this company realized when we went to go talk to them is, if you could generate proofs from the TikTok API, you can build a product that just scales to the entire market. They started back in February, and since then they've taken $500,000 from brands and given it to influencers, which is pretty crazy to think about. And it's a use case I would have never predicted, where you can take ideas born of crypto and actually solve like a purely Web2 problem. Another example of the same, so invoice factoring, this was an industry I had no idea about. It's a ginormous industry. Like the market is in the like trillions of dollars. Yeah. And how it works is, let's say I have a $1 million invoice with Amazon, and they're promising to pay me in 90 days. If I want the money early, I'll go to a factorer, and they'll front me the money with like just a cut off the top, essentially. You're just getting faster liquidity, and like 50% of the trucking in the U.S. uses invoice factoring. Believe it or not, though, this industry, standard practice is password sharing to verify invoices. You actually hand over your login to like some banker, will make sure that the invoice is legit. And there's actually a double strand problem in invoice factoring because you can sell the same invoice twice. And so each state in the US manages its own database of factored invoices. And so I ran into a co-founder of C2FO. It's a Web3 business. They raised like to the Series D, huge in the invoice factoring market. And this guy wants to use these ideas to build a product offering to suit like the invoice factoring market. Another Web2 problem that you can solve using these ideas. This is another one I would have never predicted. So the NCAA is college sports here in the US. They have rules against pay to play. So you can't pay a college athlete to play at your school. But recently they opened up to like these athletes can have brand deals on the side. And so there's a few students who are making lots of money that way. But these schools, the boosters of these universities in the US, because college sports is like a huge industry, spend insane amounts of money attracting students to play at their school, but it's an inefficient market because you can't do it directly, right? You get a better outcome if you just pay the student directly versus in an indirect way. And so you can actually use ZKTLS. This is like our COO had a connection to this company who had this realization. You can use ZKTLS to actually bypass this rule against pay to play. And how it would work is you deploy a smart contract wallet on chain. You make it unlockable by some students' social handles, like their Instagram account, their Twitter account, stuff like that. You pay money into that smart contract wallet and just define it so that they can't withdraw until they leave the league. And this bypasses the rules because there's no cooperation. Like I'm not signing a contract with the student when I do this. And if they started enforcing against this, I could get all the best players kicked out of the league by just deploying this wallet without talking to them, right? So they actually, like, as a matter of principle, can't enforce, they can't stop this if someone started doing this. But I wanted to highlight it here because the main unlock here is you can pay someone on a blockchain without them having a wallet address. You can use like your social handle as a wallet address in a trust minimized way. Like a counterfactual participation type thing. And then ZK P2P is one that you guys may be familiar with, where like the basic idea is I have $50 in Venmo, someone has 50 USDC. The person with the USDC will lock it up in a smart contract. I'll send the money over Venmo, and I'll submit a ZKP that I sent the money to unlock the funds, essentially. This is actually really cool because the current solution for like a peer-to-peer fiat on-ramp into crypto is a fisherman problem. Like whoever sends first can get screwed because the other side has an obligation to finish it. And originally they were using ZK email because the security assumptions were actually way better with ZK email because the emails are actually signed. But ZK email is also very limited, and so they've switched over to using ZKTLS. And so another use case is like POAP. So I ran into like the co-founder of POAP last day of FlarCon. When I explained to her how ZKTLS works, she got really excited because it just unlocks a whole new dimension for POAPs where you don't have to have someone like tap their phone like physically. You can just like go look at the concert tickets they have on Ticketmaster, retroactively mint a POAP for it. But probably my favorite example of a business using ZKTLS is this guy right here from Nosh. So he should be more famous than he is for what he's accomplished. So he bootstrapped his own food delivery network in Boulder, Colorado. It was doing like $10 million in revenue, which is pretty insane to think about, but it doesn't fit like the main narratives that crypto cares about. But it's an insane achievement, and I think it's something that more people should know about. But I'll let him continue the talk.
So as I was putting this together, I pretty much realized like earlier this morning that I was building a big advertising campaign for Opacity Labs. And I, maybe just to like set the stage and like, I think what we're working on together maybe has like some of the largest economic implications like in crypto generally, and I hope to convince you of that throughout the course of like my half of the presentation with some practical examples. I think a lot of these talks are pretty theoretical, but we're using this technology as integrated into our products that are touching real users, and now I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so Let's dive in. So, yeah, my name is Mike. I'm the CEO of Nosh. We're building crypto economic networking infrastructure for decentralized marketplaces. As Hersh mentioned, my background is in food delivery, and really what I hope is different about this talk is sort of like a real-world, in real-time case study of the implications of like zero-knowledge technology for disrupting existing consumer marketplace incumbents, which is, I don't know if Hersh agrees with this, like maybe you think your TAM is much larger, but I think like this is the primary implication of this technology existing in the world is like decentralized marketplace infrastructure, and I'll dive into why. The structure of this, I'm gonna like quickly breeze through an introduction of myself because I find that boring, so I won't spend too much time on it. I think decentralized Uber, decentralized DoorDash is one of the canonical ideas of crypto. It's like been this idea that I think Patel tweeted about like 10 years ago. So there's this sort of question that keeps coming up of like why now, or what is unique about today that unlocks that sort of long narrative from actually existing. And then the role of zk-TLS in decentralizing marketplaces, and maybe some of the social or economic implications of when we witness the success of this strategy, what the world might look like after that. So, back a handful of years ago, I met my co-founder who was building a restaurant and food delivery cooperative in Iowa City, and he had the world's shittiest piece of software, I would say. It had 5 to 10 second load times, like the highest latency you could ever imagine in a consumer product, and he sent it to me. And I was like, I'm never talking to this guy again because this is literally the crappiest piece of worst technology I've ever seen. And meanwhile, I was starting a food delivery company in Miami trying to solve similar problems. I built this beautiful product. I was going into restaurants, knocking on their doors and asking them if they wanted to use it, and they were like, get the fuck out of my restaurant, we hate tech people, we're sick and tired of you guys stealing all of our money from our low margin business, please get out of my restaurant. And so my co-founder then sent me his balance sheet, and they were doing over $1 million in monthly sales in Iowa City, which is like a tiny market of less than 200,000 people. And what he was doing is he built this restaurant and food delivery cooperative, which is sort of user-owned networks is sort of this cool idea in crypto. There's this long history of cooperative technology that's been implementing some of these ideas, and they were sort of early to it in food delivery. Food delivery networks are highly geographically constrained, and so they work better at a local level, and he was really exploiting this phenomenon. So we launched a similar tactic in Colorado. We have 130,000 unique users who have registered and placed an order on Nosh. And this year we'll place our 900,000th order. I really was hoping that would be 1 million, but that's for next year. And yes, and we run profitable food delivery services. So one of the key learnings that we have is user-owned networks just grow faster, more organically, and with better unit economics. And so, so we went to the drawing board. We were discovered crypto. We were crypto is the way that you scale these locally owned networks at a global scale. And then as I started diving into the principles of this sort of thing, I realized really we're solving the generic problem of incumbent marketplaces where any intermediary sort of has this same problem that we're solving for that the restaurants have with DoorDash, which is paying this outrageously high fee to facilitate distribution, essentially. So I believe in a world in which buyers and sellers across any commercial context are free to engage in peer-to-peer commercial transactions without ever having to pay an intermediary, and that represents one of the largest untapped opportunities even outside of crypto, just one of the largest untapped opportunities. Just some examples. During the pandemic, we were working with a restaurant who in April sold $16,000 worth of food. And of that, they got $7,000 from Grubhub. So $17,000 in sales and $7,000 after all of the fees that Grubhub pays to the restaurants, I would consider outrageous. This is kind of like an anomaly. If you were to chart this, it would kind of be a lonely little dot on that graph, but this is still like indicative of the problem of consumer marketplaces generally. And so, okay, as I mentioned earlier, decentralized Uber is one of these original ideas for crypto. And I'm telling you about all the problems that there are with decentralized marketplaces. Some of you are nodding along. I can tell that you're like, yes, this is a big problem. So you might ask the question, well, if this is such a big problem, why aren't more people trying to solve this? And the answer is, people have been trying to solve this, but you've never heard of them because the ideas have never worked. And the reason why, I think, is encapsulated well in Andy's quote here. He's a partner at Benchmark Capital, and he says that once a company has achieved product market fit, it is extremely difficult to dislodge it, even with a better or less expensive product. And it's sort of like dogma or codified wisdom in Silicon Valley that, like, if you get to a certain state of product adoption, you need at least a 10x improvement in either distribution, convenience, or economics in order to disrupt like an incumbent. So disruption requires some sort of like tenfold improvement on one of those dimensions in order to disintermediate incumbents. So this is why it's very hard. This is like a network effects map. I'll skip that for now. This is like another quote that I think captures why this problem of decentralizing marketplaces is so challenging. Network effects are responsible for 70% of the value created by tech companies since the internet became a thing in 1994. This is like the power law of all power laws, I would say. It's like technology creates like an asymmetrically large amount of economic value compared to other industries. And then even within technology, businesses that have network effects are responsible for the vast majority of like all market share created by technology. So like the de facto wisdom in venture capital, if any of you are venture capitalists or know any, it's like build network-based products because network effects are highly defensible businesses. And here's like the revolutionary thing that I want to say that to like shill Opacity Labs. ZK-TLS undermines the prevailing wisdom that network effects are a defensible moat for incumbent marketplaces. So if there's like one thing to take away from this presentation, it's that the fundamental implication here is like this prevailing wisdom of the last 2 to 3 decades in Silicon Valley, you can just like crumple it up and throw it over your shoulder. It's I think it's now irrelevant. The question at ZK-TLS, or when I started talking to Hersh, it's like, what if, the idea that we had is, what if instead of rebuilding networks, we can embed ourselves within the existing networks and slowly migrate from them by pulling users little by little. So to get a little bit more tactical, this is what the Nosh driver applications look like. When you first download the product, you can sign in with DoorDash or sign in with Uber and port your information from the existing marketplaces into our peer-to-peer graph, essentially. And the problem that this solves is the cold start problem. So in any new market, in any immature market, this product is highly irrelevant until the driver starts actually receiving orders. And if they're not going to start receiving orders, then they have no reason to use this product, and you can't like bootstrap a new network, especially in a decentralized context. It's very challenging. So this just completely solves that problem. The driver will receive orders from DoorDash, receive orders from Uber, and receive orders from any protocol-enabled client on the Nosh network in order to bootstrap it. So we no longer have a cold start problem. This is like huge implications, I think, for building crypto networks. And same thing for merchants, like exact same thing. So we just like bootstrap supply and our product is immediately relevant, even if the other side of the network doesn't exist yet. This is like a pretty big deal, I would say. And then the catalog, because they can prove their participation in this network, their catalog is immediately broadcast to the rest of the network, and we unlock new clients on the demand side of the ecosystem who can just start playing around and displaying that catalog of goods to their buyer within the context of their application. And so this is my favorite slide, second favorite slide in the deck, which is Opacity Labs as Santa Claus solving the cold start problem, burning the snow. And I'm trying to convince Hersh to make that Opacity's new logo. And so what I just showed you with DoorDash is generally applicable to any commercial marketplace. So this same solution is turnkey for Facebook Marketplace, for Airbnb, for DoorDash, for Uber. You can sort of rinse and repeat this exact same strategy. And then you sort of unlock all of the principles that you hear people in conferences like ECC talk about all the time, which is interoperability amongst these users, protocol diversity. You have Sybil resistance because you know these nodes within the context of this graph are real. And I think that this is like, I have an image in my head of Opacity being like a bridge to the world that we all talk about and want to see exist, by just embedding ourselves within the existing marketplaces. I think this is like getting a little bit more tactical. I'll skip some of these slides. But so this is how our network works. We have like producers that sell things, buyers that purchase things. These participants can onboard into any protocol-enabled clients using zkTLS, and then peers just gossip to fulfill intents. And then we have, not only do we not have a cold start problem, but we unlock a new capital formation mechanism where we can mint block rewards and distribute them to these participants relative to their revenue contributions. The problem with that is that crypto networks are subject to self-dealing and collusion risks because of this lack of verifiability. So how do you trust peers in a network if there's an incentive to self-deal? Well, you can know that they're unique if they logged in with zkTLS. So any of the drivers or any of the restaurants that onboarded using like DoorDash or Uber to migrate into the Nosh network, that same flow doubles as Sybil resistance. So now that we trust and kind of initializes and injects trust into the graph and unlocks new capital formation mechanisms. So this is, I'll try to explain this. It's essentially if producer 2 onboards using zkTLS and then transacts with buyer 2 and buyer 3, and buyer 2 also transacts with producer 1, we model this using network theory. And I won't get into the math behind this. You can read a white paper for that later, but what this means is we can trust producer 1 because we know producer 2 is real, and we have some level of assurances that the producer 1 is also real because they're engaging with a similar graph. So this like zkTLS doubles as self-dealing prevention, essentially, which I think is really interesting. So now we have trust, we can distribute tokens, and yeah, I think this is like, I mean, the state of the world today is like the world and the flow of dollars is sort of controlled by a small group of like large monopolies. They control the strings behind the scene and dictate how we live and operate in our lives. zkTLS gives the users of these networks the ability to control the big tech conglomerate in a way that allows us to collectively build a world that we think is better, maybe more fair and more sustainable. Nosh is working on this for like this category of marketplaces, DoorDash, Lyft, Instacart, Uber, because we think the network effects of these platforms are relatively weak, and that again this represents, this is the point that I want everybody to take away from this talk, which is that the prevailing wisdom in Silicon Valley that network effects are a defensible moat for these marketplaces, I think is irrelevant now with the advent of this technology, and it unlocks a tremendous amount of opportunity for builders in this space, and unlocks a world in which more value accrues to the participants of networks instead of rent-seeking centralized third parties. So Hersh thinks that I should be more famous, so follow along here to keep up with our journey and what we're working on, but other than that, I'll open it for questions. Where to begin? Well, let's just start in the front and then work our way back. Sure.
So what is the KTLS?
Alright, probably should have done a better job than you already, but there's 2 steps to it. You want to make an HTTPS request verifiable, and there's 3 ways you can go about this. One is you can just
Hersh, can you speak a bit louder, please?
Yeah. So ZKTLS, like the high-level ideas, we're trying to do zero-knowledge proofs over HTTPS requests, right? So the goal is to make HTTPS verifiable because, like with the existing SSL and TLS standards, HTTPS is not verifiable. If you're one of the 2 parties in like the connection, you know the data is real, but if you try to show it to someone outside, you lose verifiability. It's because of the use of symmetric keys in the encryption after the handshake, essentially, is the main reason why. And so to make HTTPS verifiable, there's only 3 ways you can go about it. One is you use a TE, so you offload a lot of cryptography to a TE. You could use the proxy architecture, so you proxy the request to an intermediary, and the intermediary just like signs a statement of what they saw, and then locally you could generate like a non-interactive ZKP. But for reasons due to experience in like working with like botting APIs in the past, like this is like a hobby that I had in my youth. The MPC architecture, which is the one that we use, using garbled circuits with oblivious transfer is the best approach, because you can make the request from the user's IP, and so you do you make the request in MPC essentially.
The simple way that I like to articulate ZKTLS is it's like verifiable data from off-chain sources. Is that accurate?
What are you proving and verifying?
So
kind of the notion that I've heard was this: you can't do ZKPs on network protocols or operating systems. But that's just given how people talk about the general paradigm of math, which the math is very different. Which is what?
okay, so in HTTPS is just like the secure version of HTTP, right? So when you make any network call, like an HTTP request, you have a request, you have your header, like the host that you're trying to get to, the path that you're trying to hit, plus all the headers, and then if there's like a body, like if it's a post request, you'll include that. In HTTPS, you do your whole handshake to get a shared secret, you derive your symmetric keys, you encrypt that plain text request, send it over to the server. They'll decrypt it and then process it, and their response is going to look very similar, just like structured differently. It's just like a text file that's very standard, and then they'll decrypt the response and send it back to you, right? And so what you can do, if you can make HTTPS verifiable, so you have guarantees that at some point you sent a particular request and the server responded with a particular response, you can generate a proof that like, okay, I fetched the API request to get my bank balance, and then I did a range proof on the actual value that it returned. And you piggyback off of less security with like certificate authorities.
So you're not actually proving and verifying that you made a request, you're proving and verifying the value for you.
No, so because when you do the MPC approach, the keys that are used to encrypt the request, no one actually knows on the client side. It's split up between the client and the MPC node, and so you have to encrypt it in MPC. Once you get the ciphertext, the client can send it up to the server, and then when you get the response, you have to decrypt it in MPC as well to make it even secure. So you are like actually. You're making it verifiable that you sent some request and you got some response and the key that was used was done with a particular public key, and then with TLS you can verify like the domain that it came from.
Well, instead of going in circles, we'll go to the next one. You guys should chat after.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Baz.
That's me.
Nice to meet you too. I think this has been my favorite presentation of the week. So
Cheers.
This is really cool. My project makes niche community spaces bootstrapped from on-chain data, but we need to use something like ZKTLS or any other kind of implementation of the TLS network idea to do what we want to do. So that would be cool. I used to work as a PM at Epic Games, where my job was to ensure child safety by building a canonical list of every single parent in the world, and we were desperate to not own this list, and they would use this like 100%.
Yeah.
This would solve so many problems for them. My question really, so I'm so jacked about this. I feel like when Steve Jobs went to Zero Park and he was like, this is the future. I guess my question is something that I don't know if I agonize about, but I think needs a really nuanced answer is, assuming that network effects and defensibility and the rules are changing, How do you answer questions like from venture capitalists when they say to you, like, what's your moat and what's your model? To the extent that you can share that today, which I understand you may not be able to share all of.
Yeah, so
And the questions for both of you as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
You can start.
So really what we're trying to do is embed ourselves within the network effects of the existing incumbent marketplaces to build a stronger moat at a protocol level that's more open and gets like a developer ecosystem. So like closed ecosystems today, like one of my core beliefs is that distributed systems are good at taking advantage of, say, the idle cognitive surplus of society, that the sum of the networks that could be built are just not built. The amount of effort that it takes to get your idea to market in today's world is like, there's a huge barrier. You have to raise venture capital, you have to hire a sales team. So we want to use the existing network as a mechanism to just like open up developer ecosystems onto like a shared generic protocol architecture. So our moat resides there. We're just kind of like migrating to a network effect that has a larger addressable market, I would say, by using the existing network effects.
It's a good question. So on my side, so I've been obsessed with this problem for many, many years, right? How do you make HTTPS verifiable? How do you derive a proof that you can actually bring on chain with like strong security guarantees? And for the longest time, I actually thought this was impossible. There's like a key problem that you run into in the MPC architecture, it's a collusion problem essentially. And the best way I could think about like solving it would risk like being able to slash honest nodes, right? Because you use like a proof of stake a network, and then you can start slashing honest nodes. But then, like when I was working on the forecaster contracts back in the fall actually, and I stumbled into a really elegant solution to this problem I thought was impossible, which I could talk about just for the sake of time. You can come find me afterwards. I can go ahead and talk about it. And so, the market for you're trying to generate proofs from Web 2 and bring it on chain. You're the only company that has an answer to this key security issue where you can actually generate proof bring it on chain with strong security guarantees. And there's like a moat around the economic. So the best you can do is economic security. It's actually possible to generate a ZK-TLS proof where like the trust goes back to the certificate authority, which is the ID. The best you can use is economic security. So there's actually a moat around like building that network, and we actually just launched a mainnet item there ADS. But if I literally just brought to market a bare bones ZK-TLS SDK that uses that ADS, I actually don't think we would have gotten as much traction as we have. Like, the other thing that we do is we pull up our sleeves and we actually go reverse engineer the APIs that people want. So like in Next case, DoorDash doesn't actually have an open API. This is like a fun side hobby of mine for years is like reverse engineering mobile apps to see how their APIs work. So we actually got them like the official DoorDash API, the one that the official DoorDash mobile app uses. And then you integrate that to the SDK and it just makes developers' lives easier.
My question is related to what you were just saying, so I'm gonna skip the line. I think Jake is fine with that. So it's exactly kind of that. So you're basically looking into the request. I guess you can sniff it and see, try to reverse engineer. Because in the end, like you get an HTTP request, you can see whatever is in there. So that's what you use to prove. I'm thinking from their side, I mean, this is basically taking their market share.
They're going to hate it. Yeah.
They're going to hate it because they're going to say, I mean, it's my request, it's my network, and you're just like taking it away to a network. And they say, cool, but they don't say that because they're gonna hate it. I wonder, like, what could they do if you were on that position? What could they do to basically break your to make this relevant? On one hand, I mean, if they care, that's because the network is already big enough, so maybe it won't be needed. But on the other hand, I mean, you probably
it's a really good
it. So
it's a really good question. I've thought about this for a really long time, and the strategy we're taking, I'm very confident, is the one where there's actually not that much these companies can do, and it's because we actually target mobile app APIs and we don't go for the browser APIs. Like one way to make our lives harder is to just like make breaking changes to your API really regularly, right? Because then you have to go figure out what the new request and response looks like. But because we target mobile app APIs, there's a few key properties here. One is you get a persistent authentication. So like just ask yourself how often you log into the Twitter mobile app. Like once you do it once, you're good, right? The responses are more concise. You're usually dealing with like JSON versus like server-side running HTML, so it's just like a lot cleaner to work with. But they're more stable too, because if Twitter makes a breaking change to their mobile app API tomorrow, it's going to break all the installs of their own application. So you're piggybacking off of like the stability of their own APIs they use for their own products, and so anything they do to you also screws over their own mobile app developers.
Okay.
We have time maybe for one more question. Go ahead.
Can you go back to the last slide, please? Like 2 slides before? This? Yeah, I think I have a better timeline.
Well, get out of here. That's still my thunder.
I think the mode is moved.
Damn it,
The mode is
Snow.
moved.
I like it, yeah, that's less words. Less words is better, I like it.
It's succinct.
Okay, we probably have time for one more now.
He doesn't count.
We can't end on that.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the notary trust issue, and I think you
The collusion
did
issue?
discuss that. And you got into that already. And you talked about crypto economic security. Can you prove though that like these parties are lying? Does it really just come down to like 3 out of 5 are asserting it, or is there some way to actually establish the trust?
So, I mean, if we have the time, I don't know if you're permitting, I can go into it. So I'll go into explaining how we actually like solve the collusion issue in our ADS, but like I'll do it step by step to explain why it's such a hard problem. So we have to use garbled circuits with oblivious transfer by the nature of the cryptography of SSL TLS, right? One way to like curb the MPC collusion issue is just to add more parties into the MPC. To do that, you have to use an SSS MPC scheme, and it's just gonna be too slow. Like it's just like an algebraic scheme that where you're trying to do like SHA-256, it's just gonna be too slow. You'll time out the request before you can do anything. So then the next option is you can just generate the proof multiple times, right? And so for something like that, like you want economic security for like slashing. And so the standard way is by committee. So your network selects a committee of nodes, you generate a proof to get a quorum, and then anyone that disagrees gets slashed, right? This doesn't actually, you can't actually do this because in the case where the user can actually like change the response in between requests, you can start slashing on its nodes, right? Like if you take your bank balance, you can just make a debit card transaction in between requests, change the balance, and construct it where you can like slash nodes that did nothing wrong. So that approach only works with static responses, something that the user can't change, right? Like I said, I got to that point, and like this started an article line, we can't, like there's just nothing we can do. But so the solution, I was inspired because I was working on the Farcaster contracts. I was thinking about how you could use like Web 2, like your Twitter handle across the Farcaster ecosystem, right? And it turns out if you have like a Web 2 identity contract with that, it actually leads to a really elegant solution. And so let's say we have a decentralized network of MPC nodes, right? And the protocol can randomly select a node for each proof that you're trying to generate, right? The first trick is you take advantage of the fact that the user can run the request before and they know what the response is going to be so they can commit to it. So a part of like adding the task to the mempool, you commit to the response that you're actually trying to prove. And the idea is there's a verifiable log of intent. So that task is assumed to have failed unless you can prove that you satisfied the commitment. And so so I'm trying to generate a proof of my bank balance. I'm trying to forge a proof that I have $1 billion in my bank account. There's some node on the network that's ready to be collude with me. I submit like a hash of $1 billion. Once the node is selected, if it's not the colluding node, I can't actually like satisfy the commitment, and so there'll be a fail, like a fail request. If you do it again, still the wrong node, that's another failure. But if you do it enough times, you're guaranteed to hit the colluding node. You can forge that proof, but because you've like left behind a trail of failed requests, the verifier can still reject the proof. But this doesn't work because of a civil issue. You can just like cycle wallets until you hit the colluding node and you have like a forged proof with the clean history. And the way you solve that is with a Web 2 identity contract. So like in the case of Twitter, your account ID is just some big number, right? The important thing to know is your account ID is the primary key in the database, is a static piece of information, and the user is not allowed to change that, right? So you can prove that by committee. So the first thing you have the user do is prove by committee they own some account ID. Now you have a mapping wallet address to account ID. Only that wallet address is allowed to present proofs for that account, and that solves the civil issue. Or you start making too many failed requests, you're just going to burn that account essentially
Okay.
at a high level.
Yeah, so there's like a little bit of setup that has to happen, but otherwise, pretty reasonable way to get around that.
Yeah. And if you want,
I appreciate you. So we have about 10 minutes, slightly less of a break. There's going to be drinks and just like a hangout after the next session that we have. And the next session that we have is just having some teams that are building on Aztec or around that ecosystem. And I think still you guys are presenting as well. Just doing very, very quick demos, very quick pitches about what they've been building. And for those of you who don't know, we've been hosting some teams for a startup school over the past week. So we only have 4 or 5 quite quick demos. It'd be great for you to stick around and encourage people that are very early in their journey of building on zero knowledge, on trust infrastructure. But otherwise, thank you very much. Thank you, Mike and Hersh, for the presentation, and I'll see you all hopefully in about 10 minutes.